Okay, so tonight's class is called Where Did Noah's Ark Land? So I did a little bit of research on this a little while back. Um, Obviously, there's a lot to the subject, so I didn't necessarily cover everything. But let's see what we can explore on the subject. So the first thing I wanted to share is when I first heard about Noah's Ark, where did I think was the most likely mountain that it probably landed on?
No, Everett.
I assumed for sure that it was probably Mount Everest. Now, why did I think it was Mount Everest? For a few reasons. First of all, when you read the story of the flood in the Torah, it makes it sound like Noah landed on the highest mountain in the world because it says, we're going to read it in just a second. It's in today's Torah portion, right? Today's Tuesday. So it's the third day of the week. We read the third Aliyah, the third section of this week's Torah portion of Noach. And today's portion, which is about the flood, how all the water, how it rained for 40 days and 40 nights, and the water went all the way up 15 amas, 15 arms lengths above the tops of all of the mountains. And the Torah says it very clearly that the water covered all of the mountains that were under all of the heavens. So it makes it very clear in the Torah that there was not a single mountain that was left uncovered. Now, there is a debate about Israel, if Israel was included in the flood, but I think even that means only if it rained in Israel or if it didn't rain in Israel. But either way, I think even the opinions that say it didn't rain in Israel, but the water did flow into Israel from other places. But at any rate, certainly everything outside of Israel was totally covered. So then when it starts talking about how the water started going down, I don't know, it just seems like from a simple reading that it landed on the tallest mountain in the world because then it says the ark landed, and then the next verse it says um, a few days later, they started seeing the tops of the mountaintops. And Rashi explains it's because, whenever a ship lands on something, first it lands, but then you can't see the ground that it's on yet because the bottom part of the ship is submerged in the water, right? So first the ship lands, the water goes down even lower, and then you can start seeing the ground that it's on. So I don't know, just a simple implication of the verses. To me, when I first heard this story, it made it sound like it was the tallest mountain in the world that it landed on. That's number one. The second reason is because the name Mount Everest sounds a tiny little bit like Mount Ararat, which is the name that's given in the Torah. So I thought, hey, maybe there's some similarity there. It sounds a little similar. Anyways, there's absolutely no source anywhere that says this proposition. I'm just sharing the very first thought that I had when I first heard this story of the Noach and the flood. So,
Yeah,
Reb
but
Shmuel, what are your thoughts
why
on that?
why would it?
Does that would that have made any sense as
Well,
a child
not.
studying the
I actually
story?
had never thought of that before. So you're the first one who
Okay,
came up with the idea that it could be Mount Everest, which was uh, quite a distance from Mesopotamia as it was.
right.
And
That's the other issue. You're right.
Yeah, and the other
It was
thing is that if you pull the chain and the water started to recede and go away into some sump hole somewhere, um, the idea is that you would somehow or other have been poised right at the peak of Mount Everest and then just got hooked there while all the water is receding. So I would think that you'd probably more likely be the boat would be flushed down and around the valleys and so forth in some way. And so I don't. I can't really visualize that Mount Everest would be a likely site any more than I could visualize that some mountain in Turkey would be of
Right.
that particular importance. But
Okay.
so I think that I think it's good enough to say. I mean, everybody's looking at this mountain in Turkey. Uh, I think it's good enough to say that at some point in time the ark got snagged in some mountain range or whatever, and that's what it was. I'm not sure what the significance of that is.
Okay.
You obviously feel it's very significant. It has to be a certain kind of place where the ark got stopped.
So I'll share more. So first of all, my final proposition is not at all that it landed in Mount Everest. I'm simply sharing that as a piece of interest, as a what does a child think when they're learning the story? And I'll share with you also more of why I even got into this question in the first place. And then we have a couple of interesting sources to check out about um, where the actual location might be according to Jewish sources. We're going to look into Josephus, which is, of course, a Jewish historian that lived around 2,000 years ago. And while it's not strictly a religious commentary, but it's a very valuable text in general, just to see what he says, what he quotes, which other traditions from his own time period does he share with his readers. So it's certainly something of value that we're going to want to take a look at. Another source that we're going to look at is the Torah translation of Yonatan ben Uziel. So it's known as Targum Jonathan. So I think there's possibly some debate as to exactly what time period this translation is from. We're talking about a translation of the Torah into Aramaic. The most famous translation of the Torah into Aramaic is the translation by Onkelos, but there's another one by Yonasan ben Uziel. And this translation might actually even date back very, very early as well, over 2,000 years, possibly. And another source we're going to look at is from the Ramban, Nachmanides, about 800 years ago. So we're definitely going to look at some serious Jewish primary sources about where the ark landed. But why am I getting into this question in the first place? Because Reb Shmuel is asking, like, what's even the significance? Who cares where it landed? So I'll tell you why I'm getting into this question in the first place. Okay. So basically, obviously, the entire story of the flood is a miraculous story from beginning to end, right? There's this catastrophic, cataclysmic flood that washes over the entire surface of planet Earth as described in the Torah. And from a spiritual standpoint, there's a question. It's brought in Likutei Torah by the first Chabad Rebbe, the Alter Rebbe. Why did God have to destroy mankind in such a dramatic way? So, even if God wanted to destroy mankind and save, of course, Noah and his family, and that was because all of humanity was corrupt. But why God could just kill them all, like boom, and they all drop dead. Why the drama of a flood? So Chassidus explains, take a look at the numbers, right? It was 40 days and 40 nights that it rained. What's the significance of 40 in Jewish law? So we know that a mikvah, a Jewish ritual bath, is also has the number 40. It has to have a minimum of 40 se'ah, that's a wet measurement, of water. in order to be considered a ritual bath that can make people that are impure pure. So it creates purity. So similarly, the flood was like something that purified the earth. The earth needed to be purified after it had become corrupted through all of the indecent acts. Prior to the flood, we needed like a total reset, a total purification, a reset, a restart, a fresh start for humanity. So that's what the flood was all about. It wasn't just destroying all the people, but it was also about purifying the earth. So that's number one. But so getting back to the general theme, though, the flood as a whole was a miraculous event. Okay? Now the question is like this: how many parts of the flood story were natural, right? So firstly, we do have um, the ship, the ark that Noah built, right? So a ship is natural, right? It wasn't a supernatural source of survival, right? Anyone can build a ship, right? Nobody built a ship, by the way. Everyone else could have built ships, right? It says um, that Noah was actually building the ship for 120 years straight. He was 600 years old when the flood started, and he was building the ship for 120 years. Why did it take him so long to build the ship? Because God wanted to give all of humanity a chance to repent. God wanted them all to look at Noah. Who's this madman building this massive ship? They should ask him, "What are you doing, old man? What are you doing? Why are you building this ship?" And he would answer them, "I'm building it because God promised he's going to bring a flood on humanity, and I want to be saved." And they could have taken the opportunity and repented, and they could have built a ship along with him or came into his ship. Anyone could have built a ship. They heard about the flood before it happened. It wasn't a surprise, but they just didn't believe it. They didn't believe it was going to happen, right? But the act of building the ark is a natural act. That anyone can build the ark. However, within the ark itself, there was something supernatural. Question is like this: how big of an ark do you need to build that could fit all of the species of animals and birds, right? We're talking mammals, reptiles, birds, everything except for fish and water creatures. But anything land or flying needed to be in the ark. So could Noah's ark, that was, let's say, I forget the numbers, 300 cubits long, could that have possibly included within itself two of every single species on planet Earth? So maybe it was cramped and they all fit in there. But another argument is that in that sense, the ark was supernatural. It fit in more than, according to the natural standpoint, could really be held in that size. Okay? So, again, we have this theme that the story of the flood in general is miraculous. Many parts of it, though, there's many parts of it, as much as possible, many parts of it were natural, right? How did the flood fill up? God opened up the deep well springs of below and the windows of the heavens from above, and that's how the water, filled up. And Noah built an ark. So there were as many parts of the story that were natural were natural. So there's another question that comes at the end of the story of the ark, and that question is, and someone asked me this question on the Chabad.org's Ask the Rabbi platform, and the question was, if Noah's ark rested on top of a really tall mountain, which, as we'll see in a moment when we go to Wikipedia, that the presumed popular site that is known as Mount Ararat today is a very tall mountain with a really uh, steep peak. So how is it possible that all of the animals were able to come down from that steep peak? How did they would have, tumbled down. They would have it's very steep, right? All of these animals, how'd they get down and repopulate planet Earth, get back to the jungles, get back to the to their natural habitats, right? So that's the question. That's a starting point, a new angle. I'm like, okay, that's an interesting question. Yeah, on the one hand, you could say, well, just like many other parts of the flood story were miraculous, so this part was also miraculous. God made a miraculous way that they all got down from the mountain. But I was thinking about it, and I was thinking that on the other hand, it could also make a lot of sense that maybe the mountain, maybe the mountain that Noah landed on was not so steep, and maybe there was a gentle slope for them to get down. I think that would be more likely, because I don't know. Just to me, it doesn't seem like it would make sense that God would cause Noah to specifically land on a really steep mountain that would cause a necessity for there to be an extra miracle for the animals to get down. Something about that didn't sit right with me. It's just a theory, but I know in general the Rebbe brings it in a number of places. God doesn't do miracles for no reason. Whenever there's a miracle, there's a purpose for it. God created the system of nature, and God doesn't want to break nature unless there's a specific reason to do so. So it why would God cause an extra miracle that it should land on a steep mountain and there needs to be an extra miracle to get down? So I'm like, let's explore from that angle, what are all the known sites or suggestions for where Noah's Ark landed, and how, and maybe what are we going to find? You know, maybe the some of the sites that Jewish tradition identifies, maybe they won't be so steep. So so I figured we'd explore from that angle. So before we
Right,
go
and can
go
I
further, does
interject
that
one
make
thing?
sense? Is that a fair angle to explore from?
Let me interject one thing. I guess is where I get lost in this. I try to be um, looking at Torah. I mean, on the one hand, let's say, for example, I'm looking at another incident of supposed to be there was a miracle crossing the Yam Suf, and the waters get parted, and people get all stretched out. Was it a west wind, an east wind? Was it a tsunami that drew the water out? And all that. And I say, no, it basically was a miracle. And Hashem parted the water and they crossed over. Now, so here we have a situation where there's a great flood. We don't know how all the animals were taken care of inside, but they were. And then the flood waters receded, and we're supposed to believe that the boat was landed at the highest point, when normally a boat would go along as the waters receded, probably around the peaks and in the valleys, and probably end up in some lower area where the water would settle. And it was a pretty good boat. It was pretty buoyant. So I don't know why it would just lodge on a peak. But so the whole thing is basically a miracle. And we can even go to the point of geologically, there's all kinds of reasons. There's all kinds of great floods after the glacial periods, and warmed, and there was all these glacial areas that were blocked up by ice that then they were released a great torrent of water 100 feet high, flooded all kinds of things everywhere, and changed the face of the earth wherever that great water was. And so we relieve ourselves. We try to get in. Now we try to get into the science of the thing. And was it a peak? Was it about over here? And how did the animals get down? And since we can't really know that, I sort of get back to the miracle of it. And how do I have to overstretch myself about these other aspects of it?
Mhm.
The story, and the reason why we have the story is to describe the replenishment of the population after Hashem found that the world was a population was in a terrible place and it had to be done away with. So now we have, so then we get down to what's really the least significant aspect of it is where is the boat, the remnants of the boat. And on top of a peak somewhere, when I say myself, it would probably be at the bottom of, it's probably in the bottom of a river valley somewhere. And,
Mhm.
and then you can get stretched out on it and all the other, and that becomes the story. Nothing wrong with the stories. I love the stories, but I preserve to, in the end, since I can't know all that, I'm big on the miracle part of it.
Okay. So 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 I just to clarify even more, I'm only using the question of what kind of surface did this land on as in almost like an interesting trigger point through which to do any ways worthwhile Jewish study. In other words, it's not this is not a purely technical uh, examination. We're gonna find a few things of interest as we go through this question. So I'm just using this as like a almost like a hook or a starting point, but actually, in truth, it does shed some light on the story in general, um, because the more the story makes sense as a whole, the more it kind of like is understandable as we understand the Torah's story and the history that is teaching us better. So besides for it being more plausible practically, it just the whole story that the Torah is trying to describe to us will make more sense. So I'm just using this as kind of like a starting point of like, so Barry was saying our islands today are really many thousands of feet tall mountains whose bases are underwater. So that's an interesting point. You're
Yeah,
basically saying like this: if you have a ship floating around on the ocean and eventually it comes near an island, so it's going to lodge onto that island. It'll get stuck on that island, which is really a mountaintop in essence, if the water would keep on going down. So what I was hypothesizing was I was just curious. One critical mistake, because I started off with the proposition of Mount Everest, which is what I thought as a little kid learning this story. I just figured it must be the tallest mountain because that's kind of what it sounds like. But one critical mistake in that theory is that Mount Ararat is not really one mountain. The wording that the Torah uses is Hare Ararat, which means the mountains plural of Ararat. So Ararat really does sound like a mountain range. And in fact, the Torah doesn't even almost seems not to care which specific mountain the ark landed on, but simply sharing that it landed on a specific mountain range. It landed on the mountains of Ararat. So that could support the general idea that maybe there was this kind of like range in general of mountains, and maybe they didn't all have such a sharp peak. When we were in school up in Massachusetts, we every year they used to do a hike up Mount Wachusett. I think that's Massachusetts' highest mountain. I'm guessing. Um, it's not like a super sharp peak. So but it's and an even bigger trip we did once in a while was to the one in New Hampshire. I forgot what it's called, Mount Monadnock, which is even taller. That was a little steeper, but at any rate, so yeah, I was just curious to explore we're just to look through this subject a little bit and see what we might find that's of interest. So I just wanted to briefly read through some of the um, psukim, some of the verses from today's Torah portion, which, by the way, do give the initial impression that it landed on the tallest place. That's why I think it really does seem like that from an initial reading. And then we'll quickly go through three more sources: Josephus and Targum Yonason, the Targum of Jonathan, the translation of Jonathan, and Nachmanides, the Ramban. So let's start with today's Torah portion right here. Second here. I'm just going to read some of the verses, just read through quickly through some of the verses. So, verse 17, the flood was upon the earth for 40 full days. The water increased and lifted the ark, and it rose above the ground. So, we're talking now about the first 40 days when it was actually raining. It rose above the ground. Rashi explains it was submerged 11 cubits deep in the water, like a laden ship partially submerged in the water. Okay, verse 18. After the rain ceased, the water surged on its own and thus increased greatly over the earth. The ark drifted on the surface of the water. 19. The water surged exceedingly high over the earth, and all the high mountains under the whole sky were covered. Very important. So verse 19 is basically makes it clear, it's right there in the verse, that all mountains under the entire heavens, that's the wording in Hebrew, were covered. Everything. Verse 20, the mountains were covered, for the water surged 15 cubits above them. Again, Rashi, 15 cubits higher than the peaks of all the mountains after the water had reached the level of all the mountain peaks. Okay, so then just verse 21 and 22, what happened? All flesh that moved upon the earth expired, including the birds, the domestic animals, the walking wildlife, and every low-lying creature that swarms in the earth, as well as all of humanity. Of every being that was on dry land, every being that breathed the breath of life died. 23, God obliterated every being that had been on the face of the earth, including humans, walking animals, crawling creatures, and the birds that fly in the sky. They are obliterated from the earth. Only Noah and those who were with him in the ark survived.
And not the giants.
Not the giants and not the fish.
But all the fish I can understand.
Right.
Giants, I don't know, we're hanging on to something.
Yeah, sorry. Yes, the giants, except for the one giant that was hanging on the side of the ark. Right. It says it somewhere else. Okay. So, verse 24, the water surged over the earth for an additional 150 days after the rainfall stopped. So, it was a total of 190 days. 40 days of rainfall, and then 150 days of additional water surge. Now, after these 190 days, verse number 1, God remembered Noah and all the wildlife and domestic animals who were with him in the ark. God caused the spirit of consolation and rest to apply to what was happening on earth, and the water began to subside. Let's go to verse 2. The well springs of the abyss and the floodgates of the heavens were sealed. Thus the rains from the heavens were held back. Verse 3, at the end of 150 days, the water started steadily receding from upon the earth. The water diminished so that, and here's a critical verse, in this verse 4, in the 7th month of the 17th day of the month, the ark came to rest on the mountains, remember it's plural, of Ararat. The water, verse 5, the water continued to diminish until the 10th month. In the 10th month, on the first of the month, the highest mountain peaks became visible. I'm not going to go to the exact numbers now, but Rashi explains that it was 2 months later. Um, 1 second. Um, sorry, let's not get into the exact amount of days, but it was after, right? So first, in verse 4, the ark rested on the mountains of Ararat. That's in verse 4. But no mountaintops were yet visible. All mountains were still covered. Right, because the ark was a little bit, part of it was submerged under the water. Only the top was sticking out. But then in verse 5, we read about when the mountain peaks started to become visible. Um, verse 6, 40 days after this, Noah opened the window he had made in the ark. I think I read in some of the commentaries, it could be there's a dispute amongst the commentaries, but Noah did not necessarily see the mountaintops himself. Some of the commentaries say from when he felt like the ark lodged onto a surface, and that's when he started to get ready to send out the birds to see if there was dry land available. But actually, I'm not sure if Rashi agrees with that, because Rashi says 40 days from when the mountaintops became visible. At any rate, so 40 days after this, Noah opened the window he had made in the ark. Verse 7, he sent up the raven, famous raven. It went out, but only circled to and fro around the ark until the water dried up from the surface of the earth. Verse 8, Noah sent out now a dove to see if the water had subsided from the surface of the earth. Again, verse 9, the dove could not find any place to rest its feet. It returned to him to the ark, for there was still water over the entire surface of the earth. He stretched out his hand and took it and brought it back to himself into the ark. Verse 10, he waited another 7 days and once again sent out the dove from the ark. Now the dove came back to him towards nightfall, and behold, it had plucked an olive leaf with its beak. Noah knew then that the water had subsided. He waited yet another 7 days and once again sent the dove, and this time it did not return. Okay.
When he's on top of the mountain, you couldn't look down and see the waters were going.
So he was inside of the ark, and I don't think he ever climbed up on top of the ark. And he wasn't ready to open the door, by the way, because there was probably a door on the side somewhere that was sealed up, and he wasn't ready to open that door until he was sure that the water wouldn't get in, right?
Yeah.
So that's why he sent out the birds. I think that's the understanding. Okay, verse 13. In the 601st year of Noah's life, on the first day of the first month, the water had drained off the earth. Noah removed the covering of the ark and looked, and saw that the earth's surface was drying. So I guess the question is, where was this covering, and why did he not open it until now? Does this mean on the side, or does this mean on the roof? But either way, let's go further. Last verse, verse 14. By the 27th day of the second month, the earth was completely dry. In other words, in the previous verse, the water was completely gone from the earth's surface, but it was still wet. It was still moist and muddy. And in this last verse, this is when the earth was completely dry. In other words, it returned to its regular, normal, dryness. So, by the way, this last verse is on my birthday, the 27th day of the second month. That's the month of Cheshvan. That's my Hebrew birthday. So it gets a special mention here in the Torah. So at any rate, so I just wanted to point out what we just read now was from the Torah itself, and along with Rashi's commentary, and it doesn't, of course, give any more details about where the ark landed, other than it was on the mountains of Ararat. Where is Ararat? It doesn't tell us. Again, to me, the first time I read this from a simple reading, it sounds like it must have somehow been on the highest mountains. because it says first the ark landed, and then the mountaintops became visible. So just from a simple reading, it really does sound like the tallest mountain. It landed on the tallest mountains. But anyways, let's go further. Now let's move on. Just briefly, we'll jump through this. I wanted to go to Wikipedia, and even though Wikipedia is not known to be the most reliable source, on the contrary, that's why I like going here. I want to see what's the popular view of um, where Mount Ararat is. Now, what do people typically associate with Mount Ararat? So if you look here in the picture, can you guys see it? We
Yeah.
have two very steep mountains, Little Ararat and Greater Ararat, in Yerevan, Armenia. Okay, and I think this is where the person who asked me the question was coming from. He had probably heard about this view of where it landed, and he was like, "What? This doesn't make sense. How do the animals get down if it landed on such a tall mountain?" Um, so let's just read the first two paragraphs here. Um, maybe Reb Shmuel, if you want to read these two paragraphs quickly, and then we'll move on.
All right. Mount Ararat is low-cap, dormant compound volcano in eastern Turkey. It's the two major volcanic cones, great little highest peak. We're talking 12,782 feet, which isn't particularly high. And I've actually hiked in the range of 12,000 feet at the Sierra Mountains in California.
Okay.
The Ararat Massif is about 22 miles wide at ground base. First recorded efforts to reach Ararat summit were made in the Middle Ages, and some guys and four others made their first recorded ascent in 1829. In Europe, the mountains have been called by the name Ararat since the Middle Ages, as it began to be identified with the mountains of Ararat, described in the Bible and the resting place of Noah's Ark, despite contention that Genesis 8:4 does not refer specifically to a Mount Ararat.
This is my point, that it refers to a mountain range. It says in mountains, plural, of Ararat.
Yeah.
Not a specific mountain. Um,
Well, it's probably not, it's a volcanic height rather than, for example, the typical mountains that are pushed up by pushed up by the fault. No, what's what I'm talking about? Pushed up by the, what do you call it? Where the masses from are pushed together. What's that called? Vary. Where you have all the portions of the earth that come over each other. You know what I'm talking about?
Tectonic plates.
Pardon me?
Tectonic plates.
Yeah.
I think it was pushed up by the tectonic
when
plate.
mountains get pushed up, that's like in the Himalayas. When mountains get pushed like that, they're very tall, but they're also very ragged and it's very sharp, very hard to climb. Whereas the volcanic thing, you have a peak and then it's all this lava falls down on it, and it's a different kind of surface. It's
But it
actually
says they're
probably in some
dormant,
cases,
right? I think it said they're dormant.
as the lava erodes, it's probably fairly maybe easier to climb down, that sort of thing.
But these look pretty sharp, though, no? Don't these look pretty
Mount
rugged?
Rainier in California, in Washington State, which I never make the peak, but you could people walk up that are not climbers. It can be dangerous because of the ice and the weather and stuff, but people that are not actual mountain climbers walk up that thing with a guided tour. And whereas you don't generally walk up Himalayan mountains, unless but you have to be mountain climbers and be very good at it. So, it's possible that you have at the time that there was a peak of a volcano that was easier to come down. Whatever.
Oh, okay, you're saying it was shorter then.
Well, it doesn't mean shorter, but it could be easier to come up and down because it's not the same kind of surface that you have when the tectonic plates push up mountains and like
No,
they're
but I'm
doing
saying if you look at the picture now, it looks quite jagged.
well, there's ice there
Hmm.
and the like. I think that we shouldn't try to dream up what
No,
the
it's
mountain
okay.
looked
It's
like
just a
or
little
anything. We
explanation.
don't have any idea.
No, it's fine.
Um,
That's
and
fine.
here
By the way, I just
again,
want to point out to you the taller mountain is almost 17,000 feet. The
yeah.
shorter one was 12,000.
Oh, okay, fine, 17,000. All right, but it's still not Mount Everest. It's still not the type of mountain to take that in Asia and so forth. We have the mountains been pushed up by tectonic plate activity, and and volcanic mountains tend to be smooth sloped, um,
Right.
in, because of all the lava that flows out of them, and then hardens over time and gets eroded.
Okay.
So it's a different deal.
I- Okay, I hear
But
you. I just want to make one comment before we go further. I don't want to give too much away, but um, I sus no, actually, let's go further. Let's move on to Josephus. So we have proposition number one. This is from Wikipedia, and it says that from the Middle Ages. You note by the way that before the Middle Ages, these mountains were not called Ararat. So this is only in the last couple hundred years they started calling these mountains Ararat. So this is a modern contention that perhaps these mountains are the mountains of Ararat, um, shared with us by Wikipedia. Well, let's move on to Josephus. This is a text from by a Jewish historian, right, from 2,000 years ago, and he goes through the entire history of the Jewish people. And what's really fascinating is that he shares a lot of data quoted also from other sources. And probably many of those other sources don't even exist today. So I just think it's an interesting source to look at, and we'll see how it fits together with the other more rabbinic sources that we're going to quote afterwards, which is the Targum translation and also the Ramban Nachmanides. So first, let's read this little piece in English, and then we'll see if there's anything in the Hebrew that's additional. So let's share this tab. We're talking the Antiquities of the Jews, 1:3. So let's just skip this part. Let's scroll down to the one the end of the flood. Okay.
895 years. Holy God.
What's 95 years?
Somebody in that paragraph lived 895
Oh,
years.
yeah. That's right.
he had a pretty good investment account that kept him going.
That's right. Where are we? Where are we here? I'm trying to find the right part. I found this before. So let's skip.
Gee, it doesn't have any vowels.
Here it is. Okay. So we're talking Antiquities of the Jews, chapter 1, section 3, subsection 5. Do you see it? Maybe Barry, if you could read this section for us.
Section 5.
Yeah.
When God gave the signal and it began to rain, the water poured down 40 entire days till it became 15 cubits higher than the earth, which was the reason why there was no greater number preserved, since they had no place to fly to. When the rain ceased, the water did but just begin to abate after 150 days, that is, on the 17th day of the 7th month. It then ceasing to subside for a little while. I can't. After this, the ark rested on the top of a certain mountain in Armenia, which when Noah understood, he opened it, and seeing a small piece of land about it, he continued quiet and conceived some cheerful hope of deliverance. But a few days afterward, when the water was decreased to a greater degree, he sent out a raven, as desirous to learn whether any other parts of the earth were left dry by the water, and whether he might go out of the ark with safety. But the raven, finding all the land still overflowed, returned to Noah again. And after 7 days, he sent out a dove to know the state of the ground, which came back to him covered with mud and bringing an olive branch. What I wonder about is that branch or a leaf could be on the water, not necessarily on land.
Okay, yeah. So interesting. The Rebbe comments, by the way, why specifically an olive branch? That olive trees are known to be the strongest type of tree,
Okay.
and gives a proposition, I believe, that maybe the olive tree was the one tree that survived the flood on the surface of the earth, something like that.
Okay. Hereby Noah learned that the earth was become clear of the flood. So after he had stayed 7 more days, he sent the living creatures out of the ark, and both he and his family went out, when he also sacrificed to God and feasted with his companions.
I just want to see. Oh, now there's one more little detail here about the mountain. Go ahead.
However, the Armenians call this place, whatever that is, number 16, the place of descent. For the ark being saved in that place, it remains as shown there by the inhabitants to this day.
Okay.
So remains are shown there by the inhabitants to this day. That's
Well, that's
interesting.
in the day of Josephus, which is 2,000 years ago.
Oh, okay.
But by the way, if you Google this place, look, I'm gonna double click on this. Sorry, I don't want to do that. See this word here? I'm gonna
Mhm.
copy this word and I'm gonna put it into Google, and it's gonna show you where that is. So I'm gonna share this tab. Back to Google the search tab, right? Let's Google this place. You see, I copied the word that was in Josephus,
Mhm. Yes.
and I copied it. It comes out as Mount Judy in Turkey. So if you go to Google Maps,
Gives us a place that's
it's a
all
different
white.
place. It's a different place than Mount Ararat that is mentioned nowadays that we saw before on Wikipedia. I'll show you how far they are from each other. So let's go to
Well,
Mount
the Turks aren't
Ararat
very tight with the
on
Armenians.
Google Maps. What was that?
All right. The Turks are not very tight with the Armenians. So I don't know if they
Right.
want to
Either
support
way,
that.
by the way, according to both opinions, it's at least
Huh.
close to Armenia.
Oh, there's Mount Cootie.
However way you do it. Let's go to Mount Judy. No, that's the wrong one.
Let's try that again.
Here. Do you see the Google Maps now? I'm going to zoom out a little bit so you can see the countries.
It keeps on coming out with me as Mount Cudi, C-U-D-I.
Yeah, I
Starts
think it's
Mount
still the right.
Judy, then
It's still
says
the
Mount
right one.
Cudi.
I think it's the right one because sometimes they record different names. Based on what I looked at before,
Cudi
I think
Daji.
it's correct. Yeah, I
That's
think it's the
interesting.
same thing.
There's a point of Cudi Daji, and then about 10 miles west of that, it shows another point of Cudi Daji. Scenic, historic, and arid mountain and pilgrimage site thought to have biblical significance.
If it's within a 10-minute drive or 10 miles, that's for our purposes that's going to be the same thing. But I want to show you this is an 8-hour drive apart. The place I told you before, remember I mentioned from Wikipedia,
Ark
those
of Noah
two
at Mount
mountain
Judy,
tops?
according to Quran, found in Mount Ararat, according to the Bible. There's an item there.
Yeah, so I just want
There's an Ark of Noah at Mount Judy, according to the Quran, and then it says found, and Mount Ararat, according to the Bible. So they're saying they're the same.
Yeah, they are saying that there's exactly. So I just want to show you here. There's an 8-hour drive between what I showed you before from Wikipedia, right? Was like this the greater Mount Ararat and the little Mount Ararat, right? 17,000 feet, 12,000 feet, the two volcanoes, right?
Uh-huh.
That's in eastern Turkey by the border of Armenia, right?
Yeah, we'll find
If you
out.
see in Google Maps right here, it says Mount Ararat. That's the top right one. You see
Right.
the on the top right where it says Mount Ararat?
Then it's about 300 miles,
But at the
320
bottom left,
miles.
that's the Mount Judy. It's in southeast Turkey near the border of Iraq. And I want to actually show you the terrain. So let's click on the terrain view. Let's click on the terrain. You could see it's another mountain range. It's south of that big lake. The big lake, there's Lake Van, VAN. So there's a whole mountain range, a pretty wide mountain range south of the lake, and so that's just one point within that mountain range. And by the way, Reb Shmuel, speaking to your point before, this is much closer to Mesopotamia. You see how close it is to Iraq? It's only a short distance from Mosul, which is an important city in ancient Mesopotamia, Nineveh. So this could make more sense. There's no mountain range between it and the valley of Mesopotamia. Like this is so I'm gonna come back to this map, but I just want to quickly jump to to back to Josephus and then to one or two more sources. So let's go back to Josephus. This is another interesting thing that he says here, really fascinating. So me back to Josephus.
I don't have
This
the
you're gonna find this really fascinating. Reb
I don't have
Shmuel,
the
maybe you want
science
to
right at
read
my
this. Go
fingertips,
ahead.
but
This is back.
but you know the Black Sea, the Mediterranean, all of those water bodies were carved out of by at some point the great hydraulic event, and so therefore in the Black Sea you've got this very narrow opening between Turkey and Greece. It is, and at one point it was closed. It was a lake. It wasn't just a sea. And then there's the Mediterranean itself, which is one point was closed between Spain and what is it, Algeria? I don't remember. And so I mean it was opened up by opened up to the greater seas by this hydraulic event. So so you can visualize back in Noah's time, certainly that things were different. And then the Great Flood came, and you had this other kind of thing happen. So,
Wait, but one second. But we're on in the story here. We're on the other side of the flood, right? The end of
yes,
the flood should be more similar to nowadays.
yes, but the waters were carved out. The seas were carved out as a result of a great water event. And like I said, I don't have the science at my fingertips, but
Right.
but the fact of the matter is that's what took place, and so there was great water events that occurred, and of course other cultures and other nations and peoples have this conscious idea of this great hydraulic event that occurred.
Excellent. So, Reb Shmuel, I think you would be absolutely fascinated to read this part. If you could read this for us, the next piece in Josephus. This is literally from 2,000 years ago. He's recording what other historians in his time recorded about flood events.
Okay, so now all the writers of barbarian histories make mention of this flood and of this ark, among whom is the Berosus, the Chaldean For when he was describing the circumstance of the flood, he goes on, thus it is said that there is still some part of this ship in Armenia at the mountains of Cordilleans, and that some people carry off pieces of the bitumen, which they take away and use chiefly as amulets for the averting of mischiefs. And Hieronymus, the Egyptian also, who wrote the Phoenician Antiquities and the Manasses and a great many more, make mention of the same. Nay, Nicholas of Damascus, in his 96th book, hath a particular relation about them where he speaks thus. Thus is great mountains in Armenia and over Minyas called Baris, upon which it is reported that many who fled at the time of the deluge were saved, and that one who was carried in an ark came on shore above the top of it, and that the remains of the timber were great while preserved. This describing the circumstance of the flood, he goes on thus, it is said, there's still some part of the ship in Armenia and the mountains of the Cordilleans, and that some people carry off pieces of the bitumen, which they take away and use chiefly as amulets for the averting of mischiefs.
No, so this we read already. Now go just
you
to the
read that?
last
Okay,
line.
yeah.
To the last line.
Oh, this might be the man about whom Moses, the legislator of the Jews, wrote. What am I talking about? There's great mountains.
So basically, Josephus is now quoting from Nicholas of Damascus.
Yeah.
And Nicholas of Damascus said, this might be the man about whom Moses and the legislators of the Jews spoke. In other words, Noah.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what do you think about that? This just the fact that he quotes all these traditions.
Well, it means that the story, not the total account, but the story existed from various cultures.
Okay, fair enough.
It isn't just there, and you can go into some other part of the world and you'll hear about a story of a great flood. So
right, no, but I just want to say all the traditions that he quoted all say that it was in Armenia.
Yeah.
They all use the word Armenia. It's written in the Hebrew by the Armenia.
Yeah.
And also he also mentions the mountain of the Cordilleans. That's also an important word. That's another clue about where this is. The word Cordu is an ancient word also, a location word, a geography word. And all of them. Okay, so now I just wanted to read the. I don't want to take up too much more time. We're gonna close this up in the next 5 minutes or so, or 5-10 minutes. But I just wanted to read what. Now I want to move to strictly rabbinical sources. We have two sources, which is the translation of the Torah by Jonathan. It's an ancient translation, and he adds also commentary. And in the commentary, he describes where the mountain range is, and it seems to fit with what Josephus said as well. So I just want to find the exact verse. It is Genesis 8:4, right? So let's go here. Genesis. I'm going to share Sepharia, right? You see, this is Sepharia. We're in Genesis chapter 8, verse 4, where it mentions the mountains of Ararat. So we're going to go to where it says Targum. That means translation. And we're going to go to Targum Jonathan. So let's read the English of Targum Jonathan, okay? And the ark rested in the 7th month, which is the month of Nisan, in the 17th day of the month, upon the mountains of Kadron. The name of the one mountain is Cardania. The name of the other mountain is Armenia. And there was built the city of Armenia in the land of the east. So that's the English. If you look at the Hebrew, you get it more exact. But basically the same idea. That it rested on the mountain range of Kadron. Remember, that's basically the same word that Josephus used, right? Because Josephus said it rested in Armenia in the mountains of the Cordilleans. So almost the exact same word is here in Targum Yonasan. And he mentions two mountains, by the way. So that's interesting. I wonder if that actually supports Wikipedia's theory that it was two tall mountains right next to each other. But at any rate, he says the mountain range called Kadiron, which is near Armenia. So that's Targum Yonasan. Let's go to the Nachmanides, back to the English. Let's go to commentary of Nachmanides. Where's N? Maybe it's on the next verse or the previous verse. Or maybe it's missing here. Let's see.
But, yeah.
Rashbam, Rikanti, Riva. 1 second here. Let's go to the next verse. Let's search for Ramban. There it is, Ramban. Okay, there it is. So this is really interesting. Let's just go down about a little bit lower. Second. Okay. Barry, if you could read from the word now, can you see it? Oh, 1 second. Let me go back up. Right there. Can you see it?
Now, according to our words, as well as those of our rabbis and all commentators, the mountains of Ararat, which are among the highest mountains under the heavens, had 15 cubits of water above their summit. Therefore, this difficulty is to be posed. It is known that the Greek mountain Olympus is very much higher than they, and the land of Ararat, which is near Babylon, lies in the lower part of the globe. Perhaps we should then say that the decrease of waters which took place on the 17th day of the 7th month was very much more than 15 cubits, and at first the tops of the high mountains were seen, not the mountains of Ararat. And it just happened that the ark was in the land of Ararat during the 7th month, and it rested on the tops of those mountains.
So I first just want to say, Nachmanides is 800 years ago. He seems to make it very clear that the mountains of Ararat that Noah landed on was not the tallest mountains at all. In fact, it was even lower than Mount Olympus in Greece, which, by the way, I looked up. I think it's around 8,000 or 9,000 feet. That makes sense, Reb Shmuel? So if that's the case, I mean, we could Google that. How tall is Mount Olympus? Sorry, let's go back to right here.
But when they're comparing this to Greece, that could be 1,000, 2,000 miles away. The Earth is not a real sphere.
So you're saying they didn't measure elevation the same way that we do.
Right, or they probably didn't even know about the differences. In fact, if you look at the ocean where we are and look at it near the equator, it could be 10 or 15 miles underground.
Right, I got you.
In other words, not only the Earth isn't flat, it's not a sphere with all the water being flat. So if you're going 1,000, 2,000 miles away, even not counting wind and things of that nature, the Earth bulges at the equator. So farther south, and Egypt is farther south, Greece is farther south. That would actually be farther from the center of the Earth than up here in Turkey.
Right, yeah, but 1 second. I think that they measure elevation not based on the center of the Earth, but they measure it based on the ocean level.
Right, but what I'm saying is the ocean level isn't really the same. We would like to think that that's zero elevation, but compared to the Earth, if you go 1,000, 2,000 miles south, it'll be a different elevation. It won't be zero. It could be a couple of thousand feet. In fact, as I say, we would be underground many miles if we were at the equator.
I hear you. Okay. But at the very least, we're talking about two locations that are both not terribly far from each other. They're both in the same, roughly the same part of the globe, right?
Well, but Turkey, Greece Armenia, versus Turkey, right? Would that be 1,000 miles, 2,000 miles?
Okay, let's say it's not like super far in the big picture.
I'm looking at it over here on Well, okay, I might be wrong. Syria, Turkey, 200, could be around 1,000 to 1,200 miles if you're talking about Cairo. If you're talking about Western Egypt, add a couple hundred more miles. So maybe 1,200 to
So here we
1,400
have on the
miles.
map, right? Greece
Huh?
is on the left, and Armenia is on the right, in the map in front of us.
Right.
Um,
Armenia being
okay, but
northeast and Cairo being southwest.
right, but at any rate, my point is that according to Nachmanides, he makes it sound like the mountains of Ararat are quite low, because if Mount Olympus, by any measure, right, is around, let's say, 9,000 feet, 10,000 feet, and
Well,
he
it's
says that
surely
the
a lot lower
mountains
than
of
Everest.
Ararat are lower than Mount Olympus. So
What's Olympus? 9,700. Okay.
if you say that Wikipedia is correct, that Mount Ararat is these two mountains in eastern Turkey near Armenia, one of which is 12,000 feet, one of which is 17,000 feet. I mean, it's hard to believe
5,137
that Nachmanides.
meters.
What?
Okay. 5,137 meters, 16,854 feet. That's
Yeah.
pretty
So
high up.
if Nachmanides believed, like Wikipedia believed, that Mount Ararat were these two peaks, I
Yep.
don't think he would say that they're shorter than Mount Olympus. Why would he go out of his way to say that?
I don't know. It looks like the little
Rather,
Ararat is 12.7 versus 16.8. That's 4,000 feet difference just between
yeah,
little
but
Ararat and big Ararat.
yeah, but he's talking about a range, a mountain range. So he wouldn't go by the lower peak; he would go by the higher peak.
Yep.
So I don't think he's talking. I think, in his opinion, he thinks that Ararat is not where Wikipedia says it is. And going back to our map that we have before,
Well, there's another possibility here.
okay,
Uh, let's say you have a big flatlands and not the Mediterranean Sea. You have a big flatlands, 50,
okay,
100 miles, and then you see a mountaintop. And gee, that mountain might be 3,000 feet up. Well, if the big flatlands
okay.
was at 10,000 feet, we're looking at a 3,000 foot mountain that'd be small when it's really 13,000 feet compared to a zero line. Was he talking
I
about an absolute height?
right.
Or is he talking
No,
about,
I
gee, you
got
look at this thing, here's a biggie, there's a little one, this is big. Yeah, kinda. But the one back here might be way, way bigger or smaller. But you don't
Well,
see this because it's 1,200 miles away. This one is
I
100
totally
you
get what
only
you're
could
saying.
judge height by
what?
comparison. You know, I don't know. You can do the geometry as long as you know, and you have to have what you have to be able to measure the shadow, you know, of the sun across and so forth, and
Right.
then you can using just some geometry, you can start to figure out altitude. But
Right.
they, of course, were already at a certain point. I don't know what this sea level is compared to any one of these other points. So if you were flying an airplane, you know, you would set your altimeter at ground zero somewhere and sea level, and then when you whatever you're going to airport you're going to land, then you have to make sure that you take take a corresponding change in your altimeter in order to make sure you don't crash. So, but these people are walking around. All they can tell is that one place is bigger than taller than another from their observation point of
I
observation.
hear you. If fair
Right.
enough, I agree with you. It's a bit, so with
Like
that
if you go
said,
to the Midwest, you can see things that are hundreds of miles away and it looks flat, but we're up a mile. Or we might
so,
be up 7,000 or 8,000 feet, but we think that's,
right.
I think
zero.
it's just part of the storytell. It makes it very interesting, but it doesn't. We're not doing facts.
Okay.
We're not doing geographical facts here. Where we can look at it from our point of view as geographical facts, but the storytellers back then were basically giving their impressions or the impressions of people who were in
Fair
the
enough.
past,
what they saw,
Um,
right?
Fair enough. There's actually so much more to discuss. I'm just going to say one final point, and then I'll sign off. Even though I acknowledge that there's more to talk about, and there is absolutely more to cover, and it's a very interesting discussion. I just want to say one final point. So I believe that Nachmanides holds similar to what Josephus says, as far as we understand Josephus, that it's the lower point in this map here in front of us, Mount Judi in Turkey, called Mount Kudi over here in Google Maps. And I believe it's that Josephus and Nachmanides agree on this location, this which is lower than those two volcano peaks at the top right. One more clue is that Nachmanides doesn't give us any ancient geographical name like um, Cadron, right? The Cordian Mountains. He doesn't give us any clue like that. He just uses the same word that the Torah uses, which is Ararat. Okay? So let me ask you this. In ancient times, was there any place known as Ararat? And the answer turns out to be that yes, there was. In ancient times, let's go to Bing. There was an area called Urartu. It was an Iron Age kingdom. And where was it? It's centered around the Armenian highlands between Lake Van, Lake Urmia, and Lake Sevan. So, in short, one second. Let's just find the. Let's find the. Let's go back to Google Maps. So, if you add a destination, let's look for Urartu. There's like a museum of this Iron Age kingdom. Sorry, let me go back here. Let me cross that out for a second. So where was this place called Urartu? There's an Iron Age kingdom called Urartu. Let's look at the map. There we go. Let's see here. That's for a good map. Here we go. So in the middle of this map, it's a little bit hard to see. But in the middle of this map, I want to go back. Visit site. Where's the map here? Okay, at any rate, let's not go through all of it now. I'll just go back to the map I had before. I'll just tell you what I researched. Urartu was headquartered, the Iron Age kingdom of Urartu was headquartered. See where it says Van, the city of Van in Turkey? That's south of Lake Van, right? Urartu was this area here, south of Lake Van, around entire Lake Van, but also south of it. So that at a simple level, when the Torah says the mountains of Ararat, it can be understood simply as the mountain range south of Lake Van in Turkey, this entire mountain range stretching all the way from central Turkey, all the way down to southeast Turkey, and down into Iraq. That entire mountain range can be called the mountains of Ararat. And that's why Nachmanides said it's not as tall as Mount Olympus. Because if you go, I'll just Google it here for a second. Let's Google how tall is Mount Judi. This is the final point. Mount Judy is only 6,800 feet. So it's shorter than Mount Olympus. So in essence, this mountain range of the Urartu Mountains is shorter than Mount Olympus. And more importantly, it's close to Mesopotamia. So it would have been a short distance, both for Noah to get there in the first place and for the population after the flood to get back to Mesopotamia. Would have been a short distance for them from the mountains of Ararat. Covered some interesting sources, and we'll call it a night. Yasher Koach, thanks for
Well, it's
joining.
very interesting. I haven't really seen this whole episode pictured this way, and trying to get some actual data about it. It opens up a lot of thought. But I think the discussion, I think that the whole Noah story is apocryphal after all, and it's intended to mean something. The fact that we're actually trying to find the boat today means something special to a lot of people. I don't think we'll ever find it, and we'll just talk about it.
Okay, great closing words. Have a great evening, gentlemen.
Good evening.
You. Take care.
Take care.